Thank you very much. And it is absolutely wonderful to be here. And I'm really looking forward to sharing today's topic, building a competitive grants program. Just by way of a very quick background, I am a fundraising consultant and I do have a company, DLB Hicks, and we specialize in helping nonprofit organizations build and strengthen grant seeking programs. So that's our core business. I've been at this for going on 34 years and have seen quite a lot in this field. And I'm really excited to share some things that are emerging in terms of how organizations are building competitive grants programs, and I'm hoping that there are going to be a few takeaways for you that you can use in your day-to-day practice with your nonprofit. Um, just to give you a quick sense of the topics we're going to cover in our time together, I'm going to center things around 5 major topic areas. So we're going to talk about how to set goals and how to think about fundraising goals in a way that they speak to the kinds of grant proposals that you can be writing and putting out there, and in a way that positions your organization quite competitively for grants. We're also going to talk about identifying right programs and opportunities to market to grantors. Let's remind ourselves that when we look at the landscape of giving by foundations, we are looking at an arena for philanthropy where basically 75 cents out of every dollar given is targeted to a program, project, or a service. This is one of the challenges of foundation grants. Not a lot of the money that's out there is really directed towards general operating support. So again, being very strategic, thinking of the programs and products and services that you have that you can market to foundations can certainly give you a leg up. How do you create an outreach plan that focuses on the right kind of foundation partners? And I think this is really important, particularly, A, we're all a bit time limited. B, the process of developing grants can sometimes take quite a while. So the question is, how do you spend that time and where do you spend that time? Talking about 21st century grant writing tools to sharpen your case and proposal. One of the things that I think we're encountering in this field, and many of you may feel this as well, is that the nature of a grant proposal is evolving. I mean, how we're writing proposals today, I think, is quite a bit different than how we were writing proposals 5 years ago and certainly 10 years ago. Kinds of information that's being requested and the kind of thinking we need to bring to the table. And I'm going to touch upon some tools that we use in our day-to-day work, again, that might be helpful to you. And then finally, talking a bit about visibility, which might be an odd topic to talk about when we talk about grant seeking programs, but realistically, we're finding that visibility does play a role, and whether your proposal is going to stand out and your organization is going to stand out. So we'll touch upon some things to think about in terms of visibility. So there's a lot to cover, and I'm going to try and cover this ground in about 30 to 35 minutes because I want to make sure I'm going to leave some time at the end for questions. So to set the stage, many of you may each year look at the Giving USA report. This comes out every June, and it looks at philanthropic giving during the prior year. And what was particularly exciting about the 2021 report, which looked at 2020, which was a tough year for us, what we see is that foundation giving went up by 17% that year. And foundation giving basically made up about 19% of all philanthropy. That's the highest percentage we've ever seen, that number. And the total aggregate giving from foundations in that year clocked in at about $88.5 billion. So pretty sharp uptick in 2021. And this has been a trend that's been evolving, say, over the last 3, 4, 5 years, where foundation giving has actually expanded at a greater rate than other kinds of philanthropy. Well, there's one pretty simple driver behind this number, and that's basically the market. Foundations generally look to what we call trailing averages on their portfolios. So think about it, foundations have a portfolio much like you have a 401k plan or you have other savings. And depending on how their portfolio, their endowment performs in the market, really determines how much money they have to give away. Well, lo and behold, the market actually has done pretty well over the last 2 to 3 years. And that's usually the period at which foundations look to decide what their giving budget is going to be for the coming year. So the long story short is coming into 2022, even if the market is a bit rocky, it's a bit up and down, foundation giving is likely going to stay pretty level with where we were in 2021, which is likely going to be a higher number than 2020. And depending on market recovery and performance, that number could even go up for the next year following. So in other words, and this is something a lot of our clients say to us, in their financial planning for their nonprofit organizations, they're beginning to see foundations as a safe harbor, so to speak, which is kind of exciting and gives us some opportunities in terms of asking for grant funding. So let's have that in mind. The other thing I thought would be important to touch upon before we get into the specifics and the strategies is to kind of think about, well, the organizations that do win a lot of grants, do they have any particular attributes that we should have in mind? And I think there are a few. I mean, one is I think organizations that tend to attract grants are organizations that have vision. And I'm going to speak to this from firsthand experience because we have clients that have done quite well throughout the last 2 years, pandemic included, because their vision took into account how the organization was changing and evolving and responding to the pandemic. So I think vision is like super, super important. That's the thing that makes your grant proposals and your presentations quite compelling. Strong leadership in the C-suite. What I see is that the organizations that have really good CEOs and really good chief financial officers, good chief development officers, they have a really good team sitting at the top of the organization, do quite well in winning grants, because if those three entities tend to talk to one another, you can really craft very well designed, very well presented presentations to funders, and you can have very effective meetings with funders, and you have a lot of great content to pump out. If I look across our different clients and I think about the ones that are doing pretty well in terms of raising money from foundations, I feel like there's this really cool dynamic between the finance office and the chief executive officer and the program departments, and all of these entities are coming together to talk and to do planning and to provide input. So I think that good grant winning charities right now are having really effective working conversations and good effective working relationships at the top of the organization. Programs that are designed to the right scale. And this is something that I think is of, let's say it's of emerging importance to foundations. I'm mindful of a number of program officers and executives at foundations that I've talked to over the years who essentially say the following: really good grant proposals don't tell me how I'm going to change, how the organization is going to change the world. They tell me how the organization is going to change their piece of the world. And so when we talk about to right scale, if a foundation senses that the organization is working at an appropriate level, what happens? Basically, you're hedging risk. This is one of the push-pulls I certainly encounter in dealing with foundations, is that they are looking for entrepreneurial ideas and they see themselves as entrepreneurial donors. But some of them are risk adverse. Some of them have risk adverse boards. And so basically it's, I always call it's navigating the line right down the middle between the two. And scale of program can help to do this. They sense that you're at a good growth mode, but you're not overreaching. Solid financials, can't say enough about this. I think that one of the big differences that I'm seeing in my day-to-day work as a consultant, my colleagues are seeing with their clients, is that we're getting far more questions back from foundations about the charity's financials. I mean, so foundations seem to be diving more into the audited financial statements and diving into the operating budget and wanting to see sort of more pragmatic planning on program budgets. So the financial piece, I think, is quite important. An active proposal pipeline. The reality is that just like a lot of fundraising, getting money from foundations and from corporate foundations is a bit of a numbers game. And grant winning charities are charities who have built a pipeline of prospects and are constantly reaching out to foundations and inviting support for programs. So, one of the things we are going to be talking about in this webinar is, how to build that pipeline where you do have an ongoing month-to-month outreach. And then finally, the ability to respond rapidly to opportunities. Again, there has been a bit of a sea change in the foundation world, responding to COVID, responding to an overdue conversation that we're having now about diversity, equity, and inclusion, um, emerging issues related to COVID, to DEI. So in other words, foundations are making some shifts in their strategies. They might not necessarily be moving entirely away from mission-based giving, but they're trying to accommodate some of the changes that are going on in in healthcare and in social issues. And grant-winning charities are ones who are stepping back and looking at their mission and their relevance, and figuring out where's the connection between where we are and where these investors happen to be. And the ones who can make those connections, I think, tend to be doing pretty well. So, market attributes of grant-winning charities. I think these are two lenses or backgrounds that we can apply to the different topics that we're going to explore. So diving into sort of more of the nuts and bolts, and again, what I'm trying to bring into this conversation is the approaches that we're taking in our day-to-day work and that we're recommending to clients. And I think any of the strategies here can be certainly adapted in different ways by different nonprofits. And so where I'm going to begin is basically with goal setting. A lot of us, think through or think about fundraising goals as essentially it's a number. How much are we going to raise this year? And we probably have one number in mind, and that number can be for the entirety of the organization, or it just might be for our particular program, like what's my grants goal for this year. And I think that we all understand that that number is made up of renewing grants, like, so how many grants are we going to be able to continue from one year to the next, and how many new grants might we bring in? And so that's kind of, we think about renewals and we think about new income, and those are the grants that we work on. But in terms of like planning and trying to think about, how can we go out there and really try to attract money, I think we have to think about goal setting a little differently. So what I have here is a matrix that we use in our planning. And think of it as you have these two silos, if you will, that we're all traditionally working in. We work on the operating side, we work on the program side. So we have to raise money to keep our agencies in business and make them run well. And obviously, we have to raise money to support the programs and the services and the good work that we're offering to help others. So there's usually a operating bucket and there's a program bucket. I would posit that within each bucket, we have two more buckets. So for the operating side, the immediate needs, so this is what we're trying to do as the top end priority, is we have to raise enough money or help raise enough money to ensure the agency can stay in business. So basically, that's our core budget. If we don't cover the core, we're not going to have a space to operate programs, and we're not going to have support staff, and we're not going to have an infrastructure that's going to ensure that programs can continue. So core has to be like, a top level, A level priority. And on the program side, continuity. We have to continue to keep our programs up and running, and we have to continue to even possibly grow those programs. So, we understand that from year to year, it's staying in business, it's growing at an appropriate level to meet needs in the community. And I think that's how a lot of us, traditionally think about raising money. But I would posit that we also have to think about future needs at the same time. And the future needs to be considered would be on the operating side, what kind of capacity can we be building for our organization that could help us maybe 2 years from now, 3 years from now, 5 years from now? So this is really putting that, remember the vision piece I talked about. The vision piece comes in around how does our agency grow? I always sometimes, laughingly refer to this with my clients as, well, what does version 2.0 look like? And what do we need to make that happen? And on the program side, it's creation. So what kinds of new emerging programs and services do we have to offer to really meet the needs and meet the opportunities that our constituents and our community are facing? So what this means is, instead of just having one number or having two buckets in which we're trying to put grant dollars, we really might be thinking about four. So the core and continuity money that we're raising comes through a lot of grant renewals. And it might, for example, give us an opportunity to go to some foundations and ask for smaller, modest level contributions. And there are still foundations out there that make those $5,000, $1,000, $2,500 gifts that can help you stay in business. That money counts. But if you're going to move your grants to the next level, you also are going to have to look at some investment level grants. So bigger grants that are going to, change the perception of how you raise money and who you are. And that's basically where you go for capacity money and program creation money. So, when people say, I want money from Bill and Melinda Gates, just like we all do, it's probably going to be money that's geared towards things like capacity building and creation. And you have to be like at a certain place where you can attract that money. So if your core and continuity is doing pretty well, you might then be positioned to add some of those bigger grants. So the idea is having kind of those two immediate and future streams of fundraising and proposals going on. Another thing to think about is kind of related to the goals is kind of what are the products that I'm taking and I'm putting out there into the marketplace. And this means, how do we choose programs to market? And I have been using a construct or a model that Bridgespan has been talking about a lot over the last 18 months. So what they have developed and they're putting out there is something called the program strategy map. And when you get the handout for today's webinar, I have put a link in where you can go over to Bridgespan and you can get a lot more information about the program strategy map. So in a nutshell, putting together a program strategy map involves looking at all the work you do and putting that work and those different programs and activities into sort of four quadrants. And the quadrants are really determined by, is your program financially sustainable, which is a very fancy way of saying, is it kind of cool and does it attract money? And does your program have a very good alignment with your goals and can achieve impact? So is there a lot of payoff in the program? And so what you see here is that if you do this exercise and you do it honestly, you will come out with programs that, quite frankly, and this is the painful part of the process, that might be seen as potential distractions, which means that we have these programs that we do because we like them, or programs we do because we've always done them this way, or they're basically they're grandfathered in. But they can be distracting because they are not really getting the impact that you need. They, in some cases, may actually be cash negative, which means you get contracts and you get grants to do the work, but essentially you're kind of losing money on the transaction. There are then foundations, though, or excuse me, programs that can be mission leaders. So the corollary here is mission leaders. And what this means is that you may not be raising tons of money for these programs, but they are very high impact and they have an incredible promise. What the folks at Bridgespan are saying, and this is a really interesting way to look at this from a grant seeking point of view, is that these are the programs that you might consider trying to market to foundations, because if they have the promise for payoff and they begin to attract money, then they become, think of it as cash positive, revenue positive, which means that they move up along that financial sustainability track. Those mission leaders move into that clear winner category. Revenue contributors might be programs that are not really changing the world. It's not like low impact program or high impact programming necessarily, but those are revenue positive. These are probably programs that are being funded by city, state, and federal contracts, where there's just a lot of basic, essential work that your organization is doing. Could have to do with, like education, feeding, healthcare, any number of contracts that are available where, those services pay for themselves. They are essential, but these are not the kinds of high impact programs that are probably going to attract big grant funding. Because go out into the world of private grants, and you have a lot of funders that are thinking very entrepreneurially. They want to try and make a big difference. Well, the revenue contributors are great because those are the things that kind of keep you in business. They fall in that core continuity part of the matrix. But ultimately, the clear winners, those are your top level programs where you are hitting on all cylinders, high impact. They are attracting money. Not surprisingly, these are probably the easiest ones to market to foundations because there's less risk involved. So using this program strategy map, a lot of times we might go through and try to really assess with the leadership in a nonprofit, well, which programs will we put into that mission leaders box where there's promise, but we can make the case that we need money, or the ones that are really, really, knocking it out of the park and that you have paid for all your core expenses, but there might be an opportunity for a foundation to come in and give a lot of money and add to that program and take it to the next level. So the program strategy map is just something worth learning about. I would really encourage you to go and spend some time on the Bridgespan site, and possibly you can incorporate that into your planning. But if you honestly move through this exercise, I find that you might identify 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 programs that could be sort of the secret sauce, so to speak, that you could take out to the funding community and really begin to attract some different kinds of philanthropic support. So we talked about goal setting and we've talked about choosing programs. Here's another thing that we have to think about. We have to think about, like, who are the quote unquote right prospects? Which foundations are we going to spend the time with? Which corporate prospects are we going to spend the time with? We can go online to Candid and access the foundation directory and do all kinds of research and identify which foundations might be interested in the work that we're doing. There's lots of ways that you can go through and use this database and put in different criteria and come out with a list. The thing is, you come out with a list of prospects, and there's no real way to prioritize this list unless either you know who the foundations are and you know a lot about the foundations, and if you work in that space on a day-to-day basis, you get to know them. But there's other criteria you can use as well to begin to really cherry pick. Where am I going to really spend my time? So we tend to think of category one, category two, and category three funders. And the intensity column means this is the intensity of time and effort we're probably going to spend on these prospects. This has everything in the world to do with planning your work. So category one funders are ones, of course, who have given money before. I mean, those are the top of the top. I mean, if they gave money last year, they have to be asked for money this year. If you have a personal contact, if their mission statement aligns tightly with where you are, if you're a close fit for their RFP. So basically, category one funders are ones that fit any number of these four criteria. And those are going to be the ones that are going to take the most work. So in a given month, we might dedicate 70+% of our time and effort in category one. Aspects are ones that in all likelihood may not have given you a grant before, but they should be on the radar screen. They've given the programs very similar to yours. They may have a tightly aligned mission. They have assets and they have giving that are large enough to accommodate a grant to you. So in other words, when you look at your research from Candid from Foundation Directory Online, you'll see how much money they have, what are their assets, and what level of gifts they give. Maybe they haven't given to you before, but it's kind of worth going through the RFP process with them, or trying to make a call or trying to make an outreach. So you're going to spend some time with these funders. You're not going to spend a lot, probably because ideally you're working with your category one funders who have the greatest chance for payoff. Category twos, you have some opportunity. And sometimes in our planning, we might pick a month where we don't have a lot of category one work to do and spend a little more time with some of those category two prospects. Then at the end, you have low category or low category three, low intensity donors. A lot of these, for example, tend to be family foundations or local corporations. Probably not really big money, but these might be foundations that will accept a grant application. And believe it or not, those are the ones you might want to go and just try to dip your toe in the water with an online or snail mailed general operating request. So, think of it as, the ones at the bottom are sort of feeding in. And I mean, the reality is, are you going to get grants from all of these? No. I mean, your hit rate might be 1 in 10, 1 in 15. This is why I'm not sure I'd spend like a ton of time with them. But you can do these kinds of applications. Sometimes you do them in BAT or a Catholic healthcare institution. And we have an entire group of family foundations that we are typically reaching out to every Easter with an appeal. So what's the hit rate on that? We might get a 1 in 10, 2 in 15 conversion rate. And that's okay. Once they given, then that foundation gets asked again, and they kind of become part of the ongoing funding picture. And to that end, we're trying to manage all of this with an outreach plan. So we think about an outreach plan as really one big gigantic annual calendar where we're really managing the donors, we're managing the prospects. Many of you, I'm sure, probably work in the very same way as well. So every single month, we're calendaring contacts with donors and prospective foundation donors. Every single month, we are getting proposals out the door. In most months, we are handling report submissions. So there's work to be done. You never really have a down month when you're doing this process. And I think, again, going back to successful grant-seeking charities, in my experience, are ones that drive this process on a month-to-month basis. And they don't sort of like wait back and say, okay, I'm going to look online and see if there's an RFP out this month. Or, gee, we're having the annual gala, and we're going to take 2 months off from asking for grant money. I get the question a lot is there a fallow time or a fallow time of year where we really don't have to do as much grant work? And then my answer is invariably no. Foundations are constantly making decisions, and we have to put ourselves, completely in front of them. I mean, that's the only way we're going to raise money. Um, to this end, it's understanding that just like with anything else, I think there's a whole moves management process. And, just to make sure that we're grounded with this moves management process, I look at it as there's sort of 5 levels of engagement with a foundation. I mean, there's the engagement level, which is the first introduction. This might be an exchange by email, it might be a conversation. It usually, I don't know, 8 times, 9 times out of 10 is going to be like a letter of inquiry or some kind of brief online application. We all do these things. Those are the ones where they give you the question, please explain your mission, your programs, and your impact, and they give you 300 words to do it. Proposal is usually the next stage. We have to give them something, a prospectus. And most foundations who have this somewhat formalized process, of course, have their own guidelines and they have their own formats, and a lot of folks have moved online. This has been a big impact of COVID, that more foundations are finally moving their process online. Within the foundation, there's usually a 1 or 2 step process. I call first stage of this process evaluation. So what they're doing is they're looking at your proposal. It's being screened. They may follow up with you to assess interest, and you can check in with them on the progress. And usually it's at this part of the process that you have to give them more information. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. If you've asked them for a very small amount of money, they're probably not going to make you go through this. But if you have asked them for a pretty sizable gift, you've told them enough in the proposal to pique their interest, but now they want to get back to the specifics. Second stage, which I call discovery, this is where the foundation might take a deeper dive into the proposal. This means that your proposal is likely going to be put in front of a board of directors. You may be asked to refine the proposal. There might be some sort of a meeting or a visit. Of course, this can be done online. And so they're learning even more about you, and they're learning more about your organization. And then finally, we've hit the right square on the game board. We've gotten to decision. And obviously, if you get the grant awarded, you have to take time to acknowledge. You have to take time to report. If you're declined, well, if you've made it all the way to a board review, getting some feedback could be important, and especially if you've developed a relationship. The reason I'm talking about moves management here has to do with planning and executing a grants calendar. Again, the idea here is how do you raise more money? How do you build a more aggressive foundation outreach plan? But by the way, this is a slide that I use a lot in conversations with board members and with CEOs, and sometimes folks who really don't understand that grants is not just let's mail a proposal and wait for the result. When you look at these 5 steps, these 5 pieces of work that we're probably going to have to go through with each foundation prospect, it helps you build some context. I mean, so when I get that question, why are we only submitting 6 proposals or 7 proposals in a month versus why aren't we mailing out 100? Well, the foundations are asking us to do a lot more due diligence, and we have to do a deeper dive. And it kind of goes back to, hey, we're doing category 1 funders, and that's 70% of our time, and that's going to be a deeper dive. How do we organize this? Well, we use a very simple work plan model in our shop. And I actually pulled some items off of a current work plan for a client. So every single month we're looking at what work we calendared. So we have prospects, and we have ask amounts assigned, and we have programs assigned. So we already know going into the month probably what we're going to be asking. If there's a deadline, we obviously note it. So we have a couple of deadlines coming due next week, and we're working on things. There's always an action step for every single prospect, and it kind of ties to that moves management. So we'll be doing a report for American Express for this particular client. And then, as the comments note, once they have it, we'll probably follow up with them in February. Once this has been completed, we'll calendar for a February follow-up. They may ask for a proposal in March. That'll be calendared for March. So you get the idea. You're always carrying things forward on a calendar until a point, the point where maybe you decide, okay, this is not a viable prospect, and you take them off the calendar. But the whole point here is that you are driving things from one month to the next. So there's never a month that we don't open up a calendar and not have work to do. So if you're able to do that and you're constantly putting information out there, then that's going to put you in a pretty good competitive position. The last two topics I'm going to very quickly cover is the toolkit, and then we'll talk about visibility and we'll take some questions. I really appreciate your patience. So when I talk about toolkit, I mean, many of us have books on grant writing. We are experienced grant writers. What's really interesting to me, and I'm coming at this from my work as a teacher. I teach at Columbia University, and I in their master's degree in nonprofit management program, and I teach a class on grant writing. And what's interesting to me is trying to find textbooks for my students. And what I'm finding doing a literature survey is that if you do a look back like 10, 20, 30 years, most of the books on grant writing kind of say the same thing, and this is all really good stuff. I mean, the fundamentals of writing a grant proposal have always been with us, but I find that there are some changes, and I'm having to bring some new topics into the conversations I'm having with students, and certainly these are new things we're having to use in our shop. And I'm going to put the first three up because I think they all go hand in hand. Using logic models or log frames, or even creating a theory of change. Something I think we all have to be mindful of is that there's a generational shift in foundation leadership. So we have millennials and Gen Xers who are essentially, now moving into positions of leadership. And a lot of those Gen Xers and millennials went to B school. And they're used to seeing programs and cases that are grounded, in, again, a logic model. I mean, have you really thought through your inputs, your outputs? Have you thought through what your outcomes might look like? So this is an additional set of thinking we have to do, I think, to write competitively to these foundations. Obviously, I don't have time to do a deep dive on any of these three, but there's tons and tons and tons of information online that can help you develop or learn to develop a logic model or a log frame or a theory of change. I mean, just be mindful that you will encounter foundations that might be looking for this information. Dynamic websites. This is something I was never talking about, probably even 3 years ago, and this has definitely been a byproduct of the pandemic. Is that I can't tell you how many times I've had clients report back to me on a conversation they've had with a grant maker that either the grant maker loved the website because they said they were able to go on, watch our video, see the work we were doing, they understand it, or they came back and said, I looked at your website, it's not really telling me a lot. Can you post something up on YouTube that I can take a look at how you do what you do? So dynamic websites that have good show and tell and engagement is a nice add-on to whatever foundation proposals you're putting out there. And trust me, they'll go and take a look at this stuff. And also using social media to post like real-time updates for your program. And it's fascinating how many program officers are actually commenting that they do go and spend some time on the social media sites of their prospective grantees. And just as an aside, there's a lot of folks who work at foundations and who are on foundation boards who hang out on LinkedIn. I mean, you can actually go on LinkedIn. You probably can find them there, and they do pay attention to the kinds of information that shows up into their feeds. And so this is an opportunity. I look at it for you to take things that you're doing and things that you're discovering and finding and get out there and share them. And that can be a jumping off point for conversations. Disability, which is our last topic, I think is super important because the reality is that there are in excess of 2 million nonprofit organizations in the US, and there's maybe about 183,000 foundations. And out of that 183,000 foundations, a little less than 30% of them will accept grant proposals. So if you do the math, the others are family foundations and trusts, um, you're going to very quickly figure out that, yeah, it's competitive. And something that can help with the competition is whether the foundation knows who you are. And I think there's 4 things to just think about as you're moving forward and you're doing your work and you're thinking, what kinds of things can we be doing that can really strengthen our position out there with competing for grants? One is thought leadership. And something I'm spending far more time with our client CEOs thinking about is, how can you get your ideas and things that you are creating out into the media? I mean, how do you get yourself out there and working on task forces, and how do you make yourself visible? Because that visibility can help when the proposal shows up and if the foundation has heard of you. I mean, that's kind of the reality. Political connections, and this means that basically if you're using your board to network to funders, and if you are using your collegial networks to network to funders, and sometimes even your political networks to network to funders. But um, just like trying to go out there and raise money from major donors, I mean, you really kind of have to think of people who work in foundations as the donors. You have to get to know them. Belonging to networks and consortia, that can be a great way for a smaller nonprofit organization to partner with others and build out your footprint. And so the more footprint you have, essentially the more competitive you might be when going for grants. And then finally, again, I can't discount social media because people spend time there, including people who work for foundations. And so I do think that is part of the picture. So those are some ideas, those are some strategies. And at this point, I think we have a few minutes to take some questions.
Thanks, John. There's no questions so far, but we'll hang out a couple of minutes to see if there are. If you don't have any questions, thanks for coming. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you have a great rest of your day. It looks like you covered it so well, there's no questions.
That's absolutely fine. Thank you.
All right. Well, thanks, John. I'll talk to you later.
All right. Thank you, guys.
Bye.